Dr. David Rodriguez was having the worst day of his career. The coffee machine in his lab had broken again. His computer was running slower than usual, and he had 3 research reports due by the end of the week, working at the government research facility deep in the Nevada desert. Wasn't exactly his dream job, but it paid well and kept him busy studying strange biological samples that came from who knows where. The facility was so remote that delivery trucks only came twice a week. That's why David was surprised when he heard heavy footsteps in the hallway outside his lab. It was Tuesday afternoon, and no deliveries were scheduled until Thursday. He looked up from his microscope, expecting to see his colleague bring in him more paperwork to fill out. Instead, 3 soldiers in dark uniforms pushed open his lab door without knocking. They wore sunglasses, even though they were indoors, and their faces looked serious, like they were dealing with something important. David had seen these guys before. They were part of the special team that brought him unusual specimens to study, but they usually called ahead and followed proper procedures. Dr. Rodriguez, the tall soldier in front, said in a flat voice, "We have a new project for you." David stood up, wiping his hands on his lab coat. "I wasn't expecting anything today. Did someone forget to update my schedule?" The soldiers didn't answer. Instead, 2 of them stepped aside, and David saw they were carrying something between them. At first, he thought it might be a large bag or equipment case, but as they moved closer, he realized it was much more than that. They were carrying a person, but not quite a person like he'd ever seen before. The being they carried was clearly alive, but barely conscious. She appeared female in shape, but her skin had a strange pale blue tint that seemed to shimmer under the laboratory lights. And legs were longer than a normal human's, and her fingers had an extra joint that made them look graceful but alien. Her hair was white like snow and fell in soft waves around her face. What shocked David most were her injuries. Burns covered much of her torso, and a strange glowing liquid that looked like liquid silver was slowly dripping from several wounds. She was breathing, but each breath seemed to cause her pain. "What happened to her?" David asked his scientist, mind already trying to process what he was seeing. The soldiers dropped her onto the metal examination table in the center of his lab with little care. The wounded being made a soft sound of pain that tugged at David's heart. It was a very human sound of suffering. "That's classified," the tall soldier said with a cold smile. "What matters is that she's yours now. Use her however you want for your research. Run whatever tests you need." One of the other soldiers laughed in a way that made David feel sick. "Have fun with your new toy, Doc. She's been giving us trouble, but she won't be fighting back anytime soon." David felt anger rise in his chest. This is a living being. She needs medical attention, not experiments. Look at her injuries. "She's not our problem anymore," the tall soldier said, already heading toward the door.
Orders came from the top.
"Study her, figure out how she works, and write us a report. You have 1 week. "Wait," David called after them. "What species is she? Where did she come from? I need background information to do proper research." The soldier stopped at the door. The tall one turned back with that same cold smile. "Figure it out yourself. That's what they pay you for." Then they were gone, leaving David alone with the mysterious wounded being on his table. David stood there for a moment, not sure what to do. In all his years as a scientist, he had never been put in a situation like this. He studied cells and tissues, not living, breathing creatures who were clearly in pain. The ethical implications made his stomach turn. He looked down at the alien woman. Her large eyes were closed, but he could see they moved beneath her eyelids like she was dreaming, or maybe having nightmares. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. The strange, glowing liquid continued to seep from her wounds, and David realized that if he didn't do something soon, she might not survive the hour. His training as a scientist kicked in. First, he needed to stabilize her condition. Then he could figure out what to do about the bigger problem of being ordered to experiment on what was obviously an intelligent being. David quickly gathered his medical supplies. The facility was equipped for biological research, so he had basic medical equipment available. He started by gently cleaning the glowing liquid from her wounds. Noting that it seemed to have healing properties, the areas where it pooled were actually healing faster than others. As he worked, he talked to her softly, the way he might talk to a scared animal. "It's okay. I'm trying to help you. I know you're hurt, but I'm going to do everything I can to make you feel better." To his surprise, her eyes opened. They were larger than human eyes, with pupils that seemed to shift color from deep purple to silver. But what struck him most was the intelligence he saw there. These weren't the eyes of a simple creature. They belonged to someone who understood exactly what was happening to her. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. The sound was musical, like wind chimes, but David could hear the pain underneath. "Don't try to talk," he said gently. "Save your strength. I'm going to help you heal." Her eyes focused on his face, and David felt something strange happen. For just a moment, he could swear he felt her emotions, fear, pain, but also a tiny spark of hope. It was as if she could sense that he was different from the soldiers who had brought her here. David worked through the night, using everything. He knew about biology and medicine to treat her injuries. He set up an IV line with a solution that seemed to help her body absorb nutrients. He carefully bandaged her wounds and monitored her vital signs. By morning, she was stable but still weak. David had dozed off in his chair beside the examination table, and he woke to find her watching him with those remarkable eyes. "Good morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" This time when she tried to speak, her voice was stronger. Words weren't in any language he recognized. But somehow he understood that she was thanking him. David realized that his life had just changed forever. He was no longer just a scientist following orders. He was now the only thing standing between this intelligent, suffering being and whatever cruel experiments his superiors had planned for her. Looking into her grateful eyes, David made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He was going to protect her, no matter what it cost him. 3 days had passed since the soldiers dropped the alien woman in David's lab. He had barely left her side, taking only short breaks to grab food and coffee. During this time, something amazing was happening. Her wounds were healing much faster than any humans would, and the strange glowing liquid that seeped from her injuries seemed to be helping the process. David noticed that whenever she was in pain, patterns of soft light would appear under her skin, flowing like rivers of starlight across her arms and face. At first, he thought it might be some kind of automatic response, like how humans sweat when they're hot. But as he watched more carefully, he began to see that the patterns were different each time. It's almost like she was trying to communicate something. On the third morning, while David was checking her temperature, she suddenly reached out and touched his hand. The moment their skin made contact, David felt something incredible happen. Images flashed through his mind, not his own memories, but hers. He saw a beautiful world with crystal cities that reached toward purple skies. He saw beings like her walking peacefully through gardens, filled with plants that glowed with their own inner light. He felt their joy, their curiosity about the universe, and their deep love for knowledge and life. Then the images turned dark. He saw ships approaching Earth, but not to attack or invade. They came with gifts, knowledge about healing diseases, about cleaning polluted air and water, about traveling between stars safely. He felt their excitement about finally meeting humans and sharing what they had learned. But then everything went wrong. Instead of being welcomed, the peaceful visitors were attacked. David saw through her eyes as soldiers surrounded their ship, using weapons that caused terrible pain. He felt her terror as her friends were captured, or worse, and she was dragged away from everything she loved. When the vision ended, David found himself staring into her large, sad eyes. Tears were running down his face, and he realized that he had just experienced the greatest tragedy in human history. His people had met beings from another world who came in peace, and they had responded with violence and fear. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for what they did to you." She made that musical sound again, but this time, David understood. It wasn't just random noise. It was language, as complex and beautiful as any human tongue. And somehow, through their connection, he was beginning to understand it. Over the next few days, they learned to communicate with each other. She would touch his hand and share images and emotions, while the light patterns on her skin would shift and change to show different meanings. David learned that her name was something like Lyra in human words, that her people were called the Luminar. Lyra told him that her people had been watching Earth for many years, waiting for humans to become wise enough for peaceful contact. They had sent small groups before to observe, always staying hidden, always hoping that one day they could step forward as friends. When they finally decided to try, they chose a small diplomatic team to make first contact. "We brought gifts," she showed him through their mental link. "Medicine that could heal your cancers, your heart diseases, your mental illnesses. Technology to clean your oceans and stop the warming of your world. Knowledge about traveling to other planets safely." David felt sick as he realized what humanity had lost through fear and stupidity. Instead of gaining allies who could solve their biggest problems, they had made enemies of the most peaceful beings in the galaxy. But as the days passed, David began to notice other things that worried him. Access was more limited than usual. Cameras in the lab that he had never paid attention to before seemed to be watching his every move. When he tried to call his sister to check on her kids, he found that his phone had no signal, even though it had worked fine the week before. Then there were the visits from Dr. Harrison, his supervisor. Usually Harrison left David alone to do his work, trusting him to file reports when necessary. But now Harrison was stopping by every day, asking detailed questions about his research progress and wanting to see all of David's notes. "The alien specimen is responding well to treatment," David would tell him, hating himself for calling Lyra a specimen, but knowing he had to be careful. "Excellent," Harrison would say with a smile that never reached his eyes. "And what have you learned about its capabilities? Any unusual biological functions we should know about?" David learned to give boring technical answers that revealed nothing important. He talked about cellular structure and protein synthesis. Things that sounded scientific but didn't hint at Lyra's intelligence or her people's advanced knowledge. But Harrison was getting suspicious. David could see it in the way the older man's eyes narrowed when David avoided certain questions, or how he would show up at unexpected times, hoping to catch David doing something he shouldn't. The worst moment came when Harrison brought a tablet. Showing security footage? "I notice you've been spending a lot of time with the specimen, even sleeping in the lab," he said casually. "That's dedication, but I want to make sure you're maintaining proper scientific objectivity." David's heart pounded as he watched himself on the screen, clearly caring for Lyra like she was a person, not a test subject. "I'm just being thorough," he said, hoping his voice sounded steady. "This is the most important discovery in human history. I want to make sure I don't miss anything." Harrison studied David's face for a long moment. "Yes, it certainly is important. In fact, I've had word from higher up the chain of command. They're very interested in our findings, especially anything related to the creature's mental capabilities." After Harrison left, David sat in his chair feeling trapped. He was beginning to understand that he wasn't really a scientist conducting research. He was a prisoner being used to extract information from another prisoner. The facility wasn't a research center, it was more like a high-tech dungeon where the government kept things they didn't want the world to know about. That night, as Lyra rested on the examination table that had become her bed, David made a decision. He pulled his chair close to her and took her hand. "Lyra," he said softly, "I need you to show me everything. Everything about your people, about why you came here, about what they're planning to do to you, because I think we're both in more danger than we realize." The light patterns under her skin began to glow brighter, and David felt himself drawn into another vision. This time he saw the truth about the facility where they were being held, and it was far worse than he had imagined. The vision Lyra shared with David that night changed everything he thought he knew about the world. He saw other facilities like theirs scattered across the country, underground bunkers where more of her people were being held. Some were being studied like lab animals. Others were being questioned using methods that made David's stomach turn. But the worst part was what Lyra showed him about his own facility. Through her enhanced senses, she could detect heat signatures and electrical patterns that humans couldn't see. She revealed that there were holding cells below his lab that he never knew existed, and that at least 3 more of her people were trapped down there. They'd been here for weeks. She communicated through their mental link, her light patterns flickering with sadness. "I can feel their pain," their fear. They don't understand why humans are hurting them when they came here. To help, David felt like he was going to be sick. All this time, he thought he was just a scientist doing research. He never imagined he was working in a place that was basically a prison for innocent beings who had come to Earth in peace. The next morning brought even worse news. Dr. Harrison arrived earlier than usual, carrying a thick folder of documents. His usual fake smile was gone, replaced by a cold, businesslike expression that made David's blood run cold. Dr. Rodriguez, Harrison said, settling into a chair across from David's desk, "I've received new orders from the Central Command. They're very pleased with your preliminary reports, but they need more detailed information about the specimen's brain function." David tried to keep his voice steady. "What kind of information?" "They want to understand how its telepathic abilities work. The military applications could be revolutionary. Imagine soldiers who could communicate without radios, or interrogators who could read thoughts directly." Harrison opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "We're scheduling the specimen for advanced neurological testing next week." David's hand started shaking as he read the papers. The advanced neurological testing was just a fancy term for brain surgery. They wanted to cut open Lyra's skull while she was still alive to study her brain tissue. The documents made it clear that the subject wasn't expected to survive the procedure. "This is scheduled for next Monday," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's right, 6 days from now. I know it seems rushed, but orders are orders." Harrison stood up and straightened his tie. "I'll need you to prepare the specimen for transport. They want her healthy and alert for the procedure." After Harrison left, David sat in his chair, staring at the death warrant he held in his hands. In 6 days, they were going to kill Lyra in the name of scientific advancement, and they expected him to help them do it. He looked over at Lyra, who was sitting up on the examination table. Even without touching her, he could tell she knew something was wrong. The light patterns under her skin were pulsing faster, and her large eyes were fixed on his face with concern. David walked over and took her hand. Instantly, she saw everything through his memories: the documents, Harrison's words, the scheduled procedure. He felt her fear spike through their connection, but what surprised him was that she wasn't just afraid for herself. "My people below," she communicated urgently. "If they do this to me, they'll do it to them too, and then they'll capture more of my kind. This won't end with just me." That's when David realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about studying aliens, it was about weaponizing them. The military wanted to understand Lyra's people so they could use their abilities for war. And once they figured out how to do that, they would hunt down every luminary in the galaxy. "We have to get out of here," David said out loud. "All of us." Lyra's eyes widened. "You would risk everything to help us? You came here to help humanity, and this is how we repaid you. The least I can do is try to fix some of the damage." David squeezed her hand. "But I need your help. I don't know this place like you do." Over the next 2 days, they planned their escape carefully. Lyra used her enhanced senses to map the entire facility, showing David passages and rooms he never knew existed. She could detect the electrical patterns of security cameras and alarm systems, helping him understand when and where they would be watched. The biggest challenge was reaching the other luminary, held in the lower levels. The cells were in a restricted area that required special clearance to access. But Lyra had an idea that might work. During the shift changes at midnight, there's a brief window when the security systems reset, she explained through their mental link. "If we move quickly, we can reach the lower levels before the new guards start their rounds." His days acting as normal as possible, while secretly gathering supplies. He collected medical equipment, food, and anything else they might need for their escape. He also started studying the facility's layout more carefully, memorizing guard schedules and security procedures. But their planning was almost discovered when Harrison made an unexpected visit on Thursday afternoon. David was in the middle of studying escape routes on his computer when Harrison walked in without knocking. "Working late again, I see," Harrison said, walking around behind David's desk to look at his screen. David's heart pounded as he quickly closed. the window showing the facility blueprints, and opened a medical report instead. Just reviewing the specimen's cellular regeneration data, he said, hoping his voice sounded casual. Harrison stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked at David with suspicion. You know, Dr. Rodriguez, some people have noticed that you seem unusually attached to this particular specimen. It's not like you. It's just the most fascinating case of my career, David replied. I want to make sure I document everything properly before the procedure. Good, because attachment to test subjects can cloud scientific judgment. We can't let emotions get in the way of important research. Harrison's voice had a warning tone that made David's skin crawl. That night, David and Lyra finalized their escape plan. They would move at midnight the next day, during the weekend shift change when security was lighter. Lyra would use her abilities to disable the electronic locks, while David used his access codes to get them through the checkpoints. What about after we escape? David asked. Where will we go? How will we contact your people? Lyra's light patterns shifted to show him a mental image of a desert location about 50 miles from the facility. My people left emergency beacons in several locations before the attack. If we can reach one of them, I can send a signal to our ships. And then what? Will they come for you? They'll come for all of us. Me, my people trapped here, and you, too, if you want. Lyra looked at him seriously. Can't stay on Earth after this. Your own people will hunt you for the rest of your life. David thought about his old life, his small apartment, his routine job, his few friends who he barely talked to anymore. Then he looked at Lyra and thought about the amazing world she had shown him in her visions. The choice wasn't really that difficult. Let's do this, he said. Tomorrow night, we save your people and get out of here. As they prepared for the most dangerous night of their lives, David felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that went beyond his own small concerns. For the first time, he was fighting for something that really mattered. The escape had worked better than David ever imagined it could. At exactly midnight, when the security systems went through their reset cycle, he and Lyra had slipped through the facility like shadows. Her ability to see electrical patterns had guided them past cameras and sensors, while her touch could somehow convince electronic locks to open without triggering alarms. The hardest part had been finding the other Luminari in the underground cells. David had never seen anything so heartbreaking in his life. 3 of Lyra's people were being kept in small, windowless rooms that looked more like cages than holding areas. They were weak from poor treatment and strange medical procedures. But their eyes still held that same intelligence and gentleness that David had come to love in Lyra. Getting them out of the facility had required every bit of courage David possessed. At one point, they had to hide in a storage closet for 20 minutes while guards walked past, and David was sure his pounding heart would give them away. Lyra's people had an amazing ability to stay perfectly still and quiet, almost like they could blend into the shadows themselves. Now, 3 weeks later, they were living in an abandoned mining town in the middle of the Nevada desert. The old buildings provided shelter from the sun during the day and hid their campfires at night. David had used his credit cards to buy supplies in the last town they'd passed through, but he knew that had probably been a mistake. The government would be tracking every purchase, every movement, trying to find them. During their time in hiding, David learned things about the Luminari that amazed him every day. They didn't just have telepathic abilities, they could sense the health of living things around them and actually help plants and animals heal faster. When they found an injured hawk near their camp, the Luminari spent hours working together to mend its broken wing. Within days, it was flying again. Your people are incredible healers, David told Lyra one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the desert rocks in shades of gold and red. It's not just healing, she replied, through their mental connection. We understand the connections between all living things. When one creature suffers, we all feel it. That's why we came to your world. We could sense that Earth itself was in pain. Through deeper conversations with Lyra and the others, David began to understand the full tragedy of what had happened. The Luminari had spent decades preparing for first contact with humanity. They had studied human languages, customs, and history. They had even learned to modify their appearance slightly to seem less frightening to humans who had never seen beings from another world. We knew humans could be violent, Lyra explained, but we also saw your capacity for art, for love, for protecting those who are weak. We believed that if we approached carefully with respect and gifts of knowledge, your people would welcome us. The gifts they had planned to share were beyond anything David had imagined. Not just cures for diseases or clean energy technology, but knowledge about the nature of consciousness itself. The Luminari understood how thoughts and emotions worked at a level that could have revolutionized human understanding of the mind. Depression, anxiety, trauma, these things that cause so much suffering for your people, one of the other Luminari, whose name sounded like Kai to David's ears, communicated during one of their evening talks. We know how to heal these wounds of the spirit, just as we heal wounds of the body. But perhaps the most incredible revelation came when Lyra showed David images of other worlds the Luminari had visited. There was an entire community of intelligent species scattered across the galaxy, all working together to share knowledge and help each other grow. Earth could have been invited to join this cosmic family, but now that invitation might never come. The Council of Worlds meets every 50 years to decide which new species are ready for contact, Lyra explained. Earth was going to be considered at the next meeting. But after what happened to us, the Council will likely decide that humans aren't ready. It might be centuries before they try again. The weight of this knowledge was almost too much for David to bear. Humanity had been on the verge of joining. Something wonderful, and fear and stupidity had destroyed that chance. Not just for his generation, but for many generations to come. Their peaceful discussions were interrupted on their 20th day in hiding when David spotted helicopters in the distance. The aircraft were flying in a search pattern, moving systematically across the desert. It was clear they were looking for something or someone. "They've found us," David said, his stomach dropping. "We need to move now." But Lyra surprised him by staying calm. "It's time," she said simply. "Time for what?" Instead of answering with words, Lyra led David and the others to a rocky outcrop about a mile from their camp. Hidden among the stones was something that looked like a piece of crystal, about the size of a baseball. It pulsed with the same gentle light that flowed under Luminari's skin. "This is one of the emergency beacons I told you about," Lyra explained. "We placed them in secret locations before we attempted first contact. If activated, it will call our ships to come for us." David watched as all 4 Luminari placed their hands on the crystal. The light inside it began to grow brighter, and David felt a strange tingling in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. "How long before they arrive?" David asked. 2 days, maybe 3. But David, there's something you need to understand." Lyra turned to face him, her large eyes filled with sadness. "When our people come, they can take us to safety. They can take you too, if you want to leave Earth forever. But if you stay, your life here will never be the same." David looked back toward the distant helicopters. Then at the 4 gentle beings who had become his family over these past weeks. "What do you mean?" "We've been documenting everything. The attack on our diplomatic mission, the imprisonment and torture of our people, the missed opportunity for peaceful contact. This information needs to reach your people, all of them, not just your government. If humans knew the truth about what happened, some of them might demand change." Kai stepped forward, adding his thoughts to the conversation. "But sharing this truth will make you a target for the rest of your life. Your government will never stop hunting you. You'll be branded as a traitor, even though you're trying to save your species from making the worst mistake in their history." David thought about his old life again, his quiet lab, his small apartment, his predictable routine. Then he thought about the amazing things he had learned, the friendships he had formed, and the cosmic community that humanity might still have a chance to join someday. "If I stay and share this information, is there really a chance it could make a difference?" he asked. "There's always hope," Lyra replied. "Your species is young, but we've seen young species learn and grow before. It might take time, but if enough humans knew the truth, they might choose differently next time." As the helicopters drew closer, and the crystal beacon pulsed with increasing intensity, David realized he was facing the most important decision of his life. Save himself by leaving with the Luminari, or risk everything to give humanity one more chance at redemption. The choice would have to be made soon, because their hiding place wouldn't stay secret much longer. The sound of helicopters grew louder as David watched the crystal beacon pulse with increasing intensity. The emergency signal had been sent, and somewhere among the stars, Lyra's people were preparing to come for them. But would they arrive? In time? How close are they? David asked, squinting at the helicopters on the horizon. Lyra closed her eyes and extended her senses outward. Maybe an hour, possibly less. They're moving in a grid pattern, checking every building and cave-in. The area. David felt his heart racing. After 3 weeks of freedom, it looked like their time was running out. But then something amazing happened. The air above them began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The shimmering grew stronger until it formed a shape, the outline of something large and graceful, hovering silently overhead. There. Here, Kai whispered, its light patterns flickering with joy and relief. A beam of soft golden light descended from the invisible ship, and David watched in wonder as 3 figures materialized within it. They looked like Lyra and her companions, but their clothing was different, flowing robes that seemed to be made of captured starlight. The one in front, who appeared to be their leader, had markings on his skin that glowed with ancient wisdom. Elder Thane, Lyra said, stepping forward and bowing respectfully. The elder's eyes swept over the group, taking in their condition and the approaching helicopters in the distance. When his gaze fell on David, the human felt a gentle presence touch his mind, not invasive like he might have expected, but warm and understanding. So this is the human who chose compassion over fear, Elder Thane communicated directly to David's thoughts. Your actions have saved the lives of 4 of our people. We are in your debt. David felt overwhelmed by the kindness in the elder's mental voice. I just did what anyone should have done. It came in peace, and my people responded with violence. I couldn't let that stand. Many humans would have followed orders without question. We chose differently, even knowing the cost. The elder turned to look at the approaching helicopters. But now, you face an even greater choice. Lyra stepped closer to David, taking his hand. Through their connection, she shared her thoughts with everyone present. David, my people can take. You with us? You would be safe, honored, welcomed into our community among the stars. You would see wonders beyond imagination and help us understand your species better. But David could sense there was more. Elder Thane answered. But your world needs witnesses to the truth. What happened here? The attack on our diplomatic mission, the torture of peaceful visitors, the lost opportunity for your species. This story must be told. Not just to your governments who already know and choose to hide it, but to your people. David looked at the small device. Kai was holding a crystalline storage unit that contained all the evidence of what had really happened. Video recordings, audio files, medical data, and testimonies from all 4 Luminari prisoners. Everything needed to prove that first contact had already occurred, and that humanity's leaders had chosen violence over cooperation. If I stay and release this information, what are the chances it will actually make a difference? David asked. Your species is at a crossroads, Elder Thane replied. Many humans are ready for a larger truth about their place in the universe. They hunger for meaning, for connection, for hope that they are not alone. This evidence could spark that awakening. Lyra squeezed David's hand tighter. But you must understand the cost. Your government will brand you a criminal, they'll say. You're mentally ill, that you made everything up. Some people will believe them. You'll spend the rest of your life being hunted, hiding, never able to live in peace. The helicopters were close enough now that David could hear the thrum of their rotors. He had maybe 10 minutes before soldiers would be rappelling down ropes, searching every rock and cave in the area. There's something else you should know, Elder Thane said, his mental voice taking on a tone of great importance. The Council of Worlds has been watching your planet for centuries. They had decided that humans were too aggressive, too divided to join the galactic community. But what you've done here, your choice to protect beings different from yourself, at great personal cost, this gives us hope. Hope for what? That not all humans are ruled by fear. If your people can see this evidence and choose differently, if enough of them can find the courage to demand change from their leaders, the Council might reconsider. Your species might get another chance at peaceful contact. David felt the weight of the decision crushing down on him. Stay and risk everything to give humanity one more opportunity, or leave forever and live safely among the stars. As he struggled with the choice, something unexpected happened. The lead helicopter suddenly veered off course and landed heavily about half a mile away, then another. David could see soldiers spilling out of the aircraft, but instead of running toward their position, they seemed confused, disoriented. "What's happening to them?" David asked. Elder Thane's light patterns shifted into what David had learned was the luminary equivalent of a smile. "We are not without resources. Soldiers will sleep for several hours and wake with no memory of this location. It will buy you time to make your decision." David looked at each of the luminary faces around him, beings who had become closer to him than his own family. Then he thought about the millions of humans who didn't even know that other intelligent life existed in the universe. They deserved to know the truth. They deserved the chance to choose for themselves. "I have to stay," David said quietly. "I have to try." Lyra's eyes filled with what could only be tears, though they glowed like liquid silver as they ran down her cheeks. "I knew you would make this choice. It's who you are," Elder Thane nodded approvingly. "Then we will make sure you have everything you need." He gestured to Kai, who handed David the crystal storage device and several other items: communication, equipment, translation software, and most importantly, a small beacon of his own. "This will let you contact us if you're ever in immediate danger," the elder explained. "And David, when your people are ready, when they've learned to choose peace over war, activate it. We'll be watching and we'll come." The goodbyes were the hardest part. Each of the luminari touched David's forehead in a gesture of deep respect and affection. Lyra was last, and their final mental connection was filled with love, hope, and an unshakable faith in the goodness that humans could achieve. "Until we meet again," she whispered. Then they were gone, lifted away in the golden beam of light that faded until even the shimmer in the air disappeared. David stood alone in the desert with the most important story in human history stored in a crystal device, small enough to fit in his pocket. The soldiers were beginning to stir in the distance, and he knew his new life as a messenger of truth was about to begin. 5 years later, David Rodriguez was the most wanted fugitive in the world, but he was also the most famous. The evidence he had released had spread across the internet like wildfire, impossible to contain or discredit completely. Videos of luminari healing abilities, audio recordings of their peaceful intentions, medical data proving their intelligence and gentleness. It had all reached the public. Governments denied everything, but millions of people around the world had seen the truth. Protests demanding peaceful contact policies sprang up in every major city. Scientists quit government jobs in protest. Religious leaders spoke about the sacred duty to welcome peaceful visitors from other worlds. And sometimes, on clear nights, when David looked up at the stars from whatever hiding place he currently called home, he could swear he saw lights moving in patterns that weren't quite like any aircraft he knew. The luminari were still watching, still waiting, still hoping that humanity would choose wisely when the next opportunity for contact arrived. David smiled and touched the small beacon in his pocket. Not to activate it, but simply to remember the promise it represented. Someday, when enough people had found the courage to choose love over fear, he would press that button and call his friends home.